Good morning, and thank you for joining. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the general session this morning. And my name is Wade Holmes, and I'm the Director of Technical Product Management within the Cloud Provider Software Business Unit. Within VMware, we're the business unit that serves our VMware Cloud Provider Program partners. And with me, I have Yves Sanford. Yves, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Also from my side, I'm Yves Sanford, CEO of the ComDivision Group. We actually help VMware here and there on different product solutions, primarily integration and professional services, and we're early on involved in the product.
And today we're going to be talking about VMware Cloud Provider Pod. So I'm really excited to announce this new product to you, and this is a product that we've purpose-built for cloud providers to be able to make it easier to provide a multi-tenant public cloud to our enterprise customers. So before I get started, I want to kind of get a sense of the audience, a pulse of the audience. How many people here are from cloud providers or aggregators? All right, cool. So majority of the audience. How many people here are enterprise customers? Okay, good. Definitely a good amount. So we'll definitely have something for everyone here. But I mentioned Cloud Provider Pod is a purpose-built product that we've created to enable our cloud providers more easily so that they can provide more enhanced solutions to our enterprise customers and aid them in their journey to digital transformation. So first, this is a product. Everything here is a pre-announcement. We announced Cloud Provider Pod this week, and it's going to be released for GA soon. But the typical disclaimers that this is about a brand new product that has yet to be released, and things are subject to change until actual GA. So the agenda today, we're going to be talking about, number one, I'll start off with VMware's overall multi-cloud vision and how cloud providers are tying to that multi-cloud vision and how we're enabling cloud providers with things such as Cloud Provider Pod. Then we'll dive into kind of what we've been hearing from our cloud providers, and I'll kind of get your feedback from the providers here a bit on whether this echoes in what your feelings are and what you feel your needs are. Then we'll dive into what is Cloud Provider Pod and how we've built Cloud Provider Pod to meet some of the needs and some of the asks that our cloud providers have been asking for to be able to enable enterprise customers. We'll dive into specific components of Cloud Provider Pod, and Yves will kind of walk through the Cloud Provider Pod Designer, the Cloud Provider Pod Deployer, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions and Q&A. So first, the overall VMware vision, and I'm sure you heard a lot about this if you attended a keynote this morning, is to be able to provide a homogeneous plane that allows for ubiquitous digital transformation or foundation for digital transformation. We want to be able to provide capabilities regardless of any device, any application, and those capabilities, whether it's management capabilities, security, compliance capabilities, across any device, any application, and more specifically, any cloud, which is where we're going to dive in here today. I mentioned there are many different routes and avenues that an enterprise is looking at today to be able to move down a multi-cloud journey. And within this, from a VMware perspective, our VMware cloud providers are key in enabling a customer's multi-cloud journey. So for those who may not be that familiar, the VMware Cloud Provider Program is basically our 4,500 plus providers that provide services to enterprise customers using VMware technology, and specifically using a set of technology and capabilities that we call the VMware Cloud Provider Platform. So these providers are located, many of you are here in this audience, located all over the world, may have regional or vertical specific capabilities, will have specific expertise in specific areas such as compliance or security service or migration capabilities or add additional value-added services. And the key here is VMware is enabling our providers to be able to provide these services more quickly and meet the needs of our customers by enhancing their data center and also by leveraging capabilities that VMware is building within the cloud. So, as I mentioned, enterprise customers today are going down this multi-cloud journey. They're going down this thing that's this buzzword of digital transformation to be able to provide additional services to meet their business needs. And this is a complex journey. They're looking at trying to modernize their own data center. They're looking at moving things to the cloud. And in this, being able to have services and capabilities, whether it's managed service from cloud providers or infrastructure as a service for cloud providers or additional capabilities from cloud providers, the first avenue that many enterprises look at is what kind of capabilities can they consume from cloud providers. So today, as an enterprise, you can consume services from our VMware Cloud Providers within the Cloud Provider program. You can also consume services from our VMware Cloud and AWS, which is a specific platform that's built within AWS and leverages the specific scale and breadth of AWS. And they're also enabling our cloud providers to provide capabilities utilizing public cloud, using our VMware Cloud services to provide managed services for our actual public clouds, native public clouds such as AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. So all of these capabilities are being provided by what we call this framework, this is called the Cloud Provider Platform. So where does Cloud Provider Pod fit in? And from this overarching framework, there's the Cloud Provider Platform and this journey that we're enabling cloud providers to help, the journey that we're helping our enterprises and arming cloud providers to be able to help our enterprises go down the road of. So basically, we're looking at being able to modernize the capabilities of our cloud providers to provide all the services that enterprises are looking for. We're also enabling the cloud providers to utilize what we call asset-light services from capabilities such as VMware Cloud and AWS, where an enterprise may want to move capabilities into VMware Cloud and AWS, but then still be able to work with a cloud provider and consume value-added capabilities or value-added services from that cloud provider. And then also, I mentioned part of this digital transformation and this journey to multi-cloud, providers are looking at how they are, or enterprises are looking at how they consume AWS, Azure, other capabilities, and VMware now providing additional VMware Cloud services that will enable them to provide managed services to enterprises to help manage capabilities for enterprise customers that are moving to public clouds. So for the rest of the presentation, this is our overarching VMware vision and the journey that we're moving, our journey that are helping our cloud providers enable within our enterprise customers. But Cloud Provider Pod specifically focuses on how cloud providers can modernize their own data center more quickly and more rapidly, provide additional services to their customers, to enterprise customers through the Cloud Provider Platform. That's a purpose-built platform for cloud providers that they'll deploy in their on-premises data center. So this is kind of talking about next what we've heard from cloud providers. Obviously, we talk to cloud providers. Many of you may have participated in different other sessions where, from a cloud provider perspective, where we'll get your feedback of what are the challenges. And this is kind of what we've been hearing that cloud providers are asking for. And it's very similar to what enterprises are asking for, which is the need for business agility, the need to be able to serve their customer base and quickly and rapidly provide services to their customers, but at the same time, in a flexible way, but at the same time, provide unique value to their customers. So to do this, they need a flexible solution stack that is flexible, yet it's fully tested and operated. They don't want to be bogged down in worrying about all the interop and scale testing and all the nitty-gritty of integrating together 10, 12, 15 different VMware products. They want to have an easy deployment, be able to have something automated, be able to accelerate the consumption of multi-tenant capabilities, and be able to have a self-service model where enterprise customers can consume services easily and quickly from a multi-tenant stack within the cloud provider's space. Being able to have visibility across different sites and with multi-site. Being able to easily have a platform that's easily extensible, and being able to tie in third-party integrations easily and customize workflows. And being able to have this all with operational guidance and be reliable and, as mentioned, have some level of guidance around scale and interop testing. So let me pause for a second here and ask you guys a question. Especially the cloud providers in audience or in general, how many people agree that these are challenges that you're facing and that you would like to see VMware help to solve? Okay, good amount. So, and I mentioned one of the key things here from a cloud provider perspective is flexibility is key. And the reason flexibility is key because cloud providers, I mentioned we have 4,500 cloud providers that provide capabilities that are unique to different geos, different verticals, different markets, and some may be able to utilize very prescriptive architecture and will deploy solutions such as VMware Cloud Foundation that is a prescriptive architecture, and some cloud providers will build everything themselves and have their own custom architecture that is using our products but really doesn't use any VMware validated guidance. Some providers are mainly providing offerings from a VMware stack perspective, and some are providing offerings that are leveraging Azure or Amazon or other multi-cloud environments. Some have different SLA demands, whether capacity-based or performance-based. And they may target different types of applications, whether they're legacy enterprise applications or whether they're new cloud-ready applications. So Cloud Provider Pod is, the focus of Cloud Provider Pod is to be able to quickly and easily deploy infrastructure that balances the needs of being able to provide a standardized platform that is easy to quickly deploy through automation and be able to manage and operate because of standardized operational guidance, but at the same time deploys products and capabilities that gives you the flexibility to provide customized services to meet the needs of your target audience or meet the needs of your specific vertical. So at the end of the day, what this is about and what this is focused on is being able to focus less on the nitty-gritty of infrastructure and focus more on business outcomes. Being able to accelerate time to market with services, solutions and services that enterprises can consume, and be able to more easily build out differentiated and value-added services based on the solution stack. So kind of as we went through this process of developing Cloud Provider Pod, we asked some very key questions, and we took a step back and looked at what we had today as far as guidance to our providers, and what we've had to this point is something called certified reference designs. So how many people, especially the providers here, are familiar with the VMware certified reference designs? Okay, good amount. So basically, VMware Cloud Provider Pod is an evolution of our certified reference design guidance for cloud providers. So basically, we started out and said we have these documents that provide scale and operation testing for a specific building material, specific products that cloud providers can consume, but how can we make this easier and more consumable and enable cloud providers further? So first we looked at how can we balance that, meet that need of providing flexibility from a design perspective and also providing a level of standardization and guidance. And we started out with looking at automated documentation deployment, which is part of what Cloud Provider Pod provides, where a provider can input specific design criteria, design inputs, and then have automatically customized design documentation that is still aligned to the interop and scale testing that VMware has provided that we've done to date in certified reference designs. So then we looked at, well, can we take it a step further and based on these custom inputs also provide automated deployment and day zero automation for the cloud providers. So based on specific, looking at the criteria from a validated design perspective and then looking at specific use cases, we then built Cloud Provider Pod and architecture around Cloud Provider Pod to actually deploy the automated validated stack based on design inputs that a cloud provider provides. And that's what brought us to where we are today with Cloud Provider Pod 1.0 that will be released very soon. So next I'm going to go in a little bit deeper into what is Cloud Provider Pod. I mean, I've been talking about it a lot, but what actually is this thing? So Cloud Provider Pod is basically, there's two parts to Cloud Provider Pod that provides automated deployment of a tested and validated VMware validated design aligned stack, in addition to providing customized guidance through customized documentation that based on design inputs that you input into what we call the Cloud Provider Pod Designer. The deployment, it deploys a fully interoperable, fully tested vCloud Director-based multi-tenant cloud. The products that are deployed include vRealize Orchestrator, vCloud Director, vRealize Log Insight, vRealize Network Insight, Usage Meter, vCloud Director Extender, on top of a SDDC base of vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. And vSAN is an optional component. You can obviously use a full hyperconverged capability platform using Cloud Provider Pod, but it also will deploy in NFS and iSCSI environments. So the focus of this, I mentioned, from a provider perspective, is to enable the consumption of these products and capabilities, so you're no longer focusing on the build out of the stack and interop and scale testing of the stack. And from an enterprise perspective, who's looking at a cloud provider, who's utilizing Cloud Provider Pod, you know that this is a standard, validated, tested infrastructure with trusted SDDC stack as a baseline. So these are the specific products that are a focus of Cloud Provider Pod 1.0. They mentioned the SDDC base of vSphere, vSAN, NSX, vCloud Director, which is actually the cloud management platform focused on cloud providers and is foundational for the product. vRealize Orchestrator, which is also foundational, and we'll talk a little bit more how vRealize Orchestrator actually pulls everything together and is the automation engine for Cloud Provider Pod. vRealize Operations to provide management capabilities and also chargeback capabilities, tenant-facing chargeback capabilities for cloud providers, which is new in vRealize Operations 7.0. vRealize Log Insight for logging capability, Network Insight for visibility and microsegmentation and network visibility and microsegmentation planning. And Usage Meter to be able to meter the environment from a cloud provider perspective.
Hey, wait.
Yes.
So I'm looking at this, and it's got a lot of good stuff, but it seems like this is a lot of stuff as cloud providers we've already had to do today to be a cloud provider, a lot of this automation, reporting. So is this just a product to help us not have to do a lot of that manually anymore? Because you can't be a cloud provider and not have automation, right? I mean, that was part of it from day one.
So, and the question was, as a cloud provider, you may already be doing this, you already have this in-house. What is this? What does this give you in addition? So yes, as a cloud provider, obviously many cloud providers have many disparate methods for automation. They may be doing some things manual, may have different types of stacks. So this is a way to be able to consume a standardized stack more easily as you continue to build out your environment, and specifically a vCloud Director-based multi-tenant stack. There are a lot of cloud providers that may already be aligned with, I mentioned our certified reference design, but they may have different levels of automation, they may have different levels of standardization across different regions, and this is a product that it can consume and easily make their platform more homogeneous, and so you don't have to worry about that and focus more on building services on top of the stack. So, and this is just building on that a little bit more. The whole focus is to enable cloud providers agility, reliability, and flexibility. Enabling further agility, so you're focused on building out services, reliability, and you notice it's a tested, validated stack with scale and interop testing already performed. And flexibility in that the automation that this builds and the method that the automation was built on is based on is hardware agnostic as long as the products are on the vSphere, vSAN, or VMware HCL and a hardware compatibility list. So this gives a level of flexibility where this can be deployed on any HCL listed infrastructure, hardware infrastructure. And I think one of the things to mention, we've talked to a lot of cloud providers, and even though a lot of cloud providers are obviously doing this today, there's varying levels of effort to be able to deploy out such a stack, whether it's days, weeks at a time. But with Cloud Provider Pod, you'll be able to deploy this full stack, ready to be able to build services on top of it in a matter of hours in an automated fashion instead of days, weeks, and in addition, have full documentation and customized documentation based on this stack that's been built out in that same amount of time in a matter of hours. So I mentioned that Cloud Provider Pod is, one of the keys of Cloud Provider Pod is it's a multi-tenant cloud built around vCloud Director. So with that, there are a huge amount of capabilities that are now exposed through vCloud Director and the products that are integrated in this. I mentioned a few of them. I mentioned the products that are part of Cloud Provider Pod 1.0. And with these capabilities, it allows for services such as extension and migration through vCloud Extender, obviously the built-in multi-tenancy of vCloud Director, operational visibility and insights through vRealize Operations 7.0 from a compute perspective, and vRealize Network Insight from a networking perspective for enhanced visibility. Third-party ISV integration that can be built in via VCD, such as Avamar integration that allows for tenant-facing backup as a service that we've announced today. Chargeback capabilities through VROps, which we've also with VROps 7.0 allows for tenant-facing chargeback capabilities that are exposed through VCD on a per-tenant basis. Multi-site capabilities that are being built out through VCD. Being able to provide container as a service capabilities through the integration that we built in through VCD today to provide self-service tenant container capabilities. Data protection and availability through integrations that we're building out into VCD. Workflow automation through vRealize Orchestrator. And the Cloud Provider Pod ties together, as I mentioned, with design guidance. It's an automated deployment, and the implementation is validated and it includes additional operational guidance based on the design and based on the inputs that you've chosen when going through the implementation. And then from an enterprise perspective, I mentioned that there are definitely benefits when looking at a cloud provider that utilizes Cloud Provider Pod. Some of them include, if from a enterprise perspective, you can go, if you go to a cloud verified provider, you know that they're utilizing this interrupted, tested stack with these specific capabilities and that you know will be compatible with your SDDC data center at home and within your own enterprise data center. And you know that this is based on a VMware Validated Design or aligned architecture that the provider has gone through this level of scale and interop testing based on this automated deployment. So for the providers here who I mentioned are familiar with certified reference design and are familiar with VMware Cloud Verified and actually let me ask the question, how many people here are familiar with VMware Cloud Verified? So basically VMware Cloud Verified is our process to validate providers are offering a specific VMware stack, and there's basically two routes to get into VMware Cloud Verified. Previously, it was utilizing our certified reference design and/or utilizing VMware Cloud Foundation to make sure that these providers they are providing a VMware validated stack to enterprise customers. And going forward, VMware utilizing Cloud Provider Pod deployed architecture will be a route to ensuring that you're a VMware Cloud Verified provider, and really it will be the easy button to VMware Cloud Verified, so to speak, in that you know that if you're utilizing Cloud Provider Pod infrastructure, you've deployed all the components to meet the requirements to meet VMware Cloud Verified. So let me pause here for a second. We'll have time at the end for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Yves, where he's going to go into some of the technical details around Cloud Provider Pod, the designer, the deployer, and its capabilities.
Good, thank you. So let's take a closer look about how Cloud Provider Pod designer and then later on the deployer is actually going to work. So from this point of view, you are going to, as a service provider, log into the Cloud Solutions page, and over there you get the ability to enter all the information into the Cloud Provider Pod Designer, and we are going to go through a demo video on that real quick. Once you entered all the information, the system is going to hand off all this data into the content or document generator. So what's going to happen is all the information about which products you want to have in there. So if you decide whether you are going to use vRops, Network Insight or something like that, and based on the sizing information, it's going to actually customize the architecture and everything for you. So that's also going to take a while. So once you entered all the information on the web page, it can take several minutes until the documents are generated. So the documents include a set of PDFs with architecture documents, operations guides, and everything. And the beauty of that, in contrast to some of the other documents which you normally get, everything is completely customized with your IP addresses, your names in it, and everything else. So that makes it also easier from a day-to-day operations perspective, because you can hand over those documents to someone else. Also, you can always come back and take the configuration you have and re-import it and make changes to it. So you can come back and say, we have different IP sets or anything else, and then the system will regenerate those types of documents, configuration sheets, and everything else for your infrastructure. So once the system has completed all of that, it's going to zip it all up or create a OneDrive folder or whatever else, and it's actually going to send you a link how you can actually access those documents. So let's quickly go through a little demo on how this actually works. So this is, let me see, does it start? So this is basically the page you are going to go to once the product is going to be publicly released. So over there it will start the pod designer. you will need a login for this. So this is currently only available for service providers. Once you're logged in, you can then basically pick between a standard designer, which is relatively straightforward, and sometimes it's easier to just actually enter your basic information here, your company name and email, which we are going to use to send documents to, initial password. That's for all the components we deploy. We ask for an initial password. You can later on with the workflow change that. Then you can pick and choose the individual products you're going to use, choose which storage platform you're going to use, whether it's going to be 1 or 2 availability zones, how many resource clusters you're going to have, how many hosts are going to be in that cluster, and that's the standard design. That's also a good starting point if you just want to get a feeling about what Cloud Provider Pod actually does, what the design documents look like. You can also take the config file from there and move on with that. You always get such an ID back. That's if anything would go wrong or you have any issues with these documents, you can always come back to us, and with that ID we can basically track it back. So that's the standard approach. The other approach is the more advanced designer option. And with the more advanced designer options, we allow you to customize IP addresses and all kinds of other things. So again, you can take the same configuration. You can pick and choose all these individual configuration parameters in your infrastructure. We are going to keep them. This way you can have your own prefix for host names. You can specify the DNS servers we are going to use. You can specify the NTP servers and everything else. So we are depending on some services being existing in your infrastructure. Whether your router is going to always be lowest or highest IP, this depends on, because we deploy NSX with it. So based on that, we are going to automatically initiate a certain set of routing tables. What's your individual networks? The system will automatically also check whether there is any overlap, whether these networks are big enough for all the components you have chosen. So for example, if you add all the products at the beginning, we need a bigger room in the management pod, which VLANs you are going to use in that. And so there is a lot of logical check going on in the background of the system for this. So it's telling you also if the networks are too small or too big. You also see here there is an additional tab, and we are going to get to that in a second once the system is there, for MAC addresses. Why do we ask for MAC addresses? Later on when we come to the deployer, we actually are going to physically kickstart from empty physical boxes. So to be able to kickstart those, we need to know the MAC addresses, because you want to be sure that you know which host is going to be which one in the end. Otherwise we could just say, just throw 100 hosts against it and it will automatically pick it. That would work, but it's far from reality. So you can enter it here. Even if you don't want to enter it here, later on in the deployer process, you would be asked at that stage. So if that during this design phase you don't have that information, you can always later on in the actual deployment enter those informations. At that point, then you just leave the defaults in here, and the system is going to let you move away with it. Same or similar information is going to be entered for the resource cluster. We also have IP ranges for external networks. So if your customers are going to host their own edges and everything else, you can customize those as well. If you leave this empty, we are going to make decisions for you. So for a lot of that stuff, you can leave a lot of that stuff empty, and then you will just have to live with whatever we decide is our standard, but you can customize it if you want as well. So that's the options we give you here. And again, even if you don't enter it in the beginning and then you get the design documents, as said, you can always come back, use the configuration file, make changes to it, and move on from there. So it's quite a lot of detail we have here to customize. In theory, we could even customize a bit more, and that's something we are going to cover real quick later on. The whole system is basically an open platform. So those are workflows in Orchestrator which are going to come out later on. So there is an ability for us to make changes to the system if required. So if you have any specific needs in your infrastructure, that's possible as well. Let me quickly see if I can somehow... Okay. Good. So once all of that is basically done, you get your documents. And in the interest of time, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly show you the deployer first, so that you have seen how the automatic deployment works. And then with the remaining time, we can then have a closer look in the actual documents, and I could show you some sample documents for that. So once your design has been created, how do we deploy the actual infrastructure? And so The idea is, as a service provider, you basically download an OVA from the VMware homepage, which contains the CloudPod initiator or deployer. And that is basically a nested ESXi host containing some basic systems we need for the deployment process. So there is a CentOS machine in there which contains all the VMware binaries and everything else. So for you as a service provider, this basically means it's a one-stop download. You always only go once to the VMware homepage, you download a whatever gigabyte box that's going to be. I think it's currently somewhere between 30 and 40 gigabytes, and that contains everything we need for the infrastructure. So all the products, all the patches, everything which is required. Once that's deployed, you are going to run through a configuration workflow. That's going to re-IP and make all the changes which we need to do to the initiator to make that work. Once that's done, we can actually then start deploying the management cluster, and that's followed by the resource pod, and then we could actually add additional resource clusters if needed. And then we actually go and configure all these systems for you, because we first need to have resource clusters up before we can actually deploy provider VDCs in vCloud Director. There are some products where you need to do some manual configurations at the moment because we don't have APIs, but for the future we are trying to get all of that in there. But it's, when we did the checks, it's about half an hour, 45 minutes of manual work you have to do. Everything else is completely automated in the stack. And once everything is done, you can basically destroy this appliance because we handed over all these services into your infrastructure. So you will find the orchestrator with all the workflows and everything in your infrastructure. You will find all the initiator, so the CentOS VM and everything has been moved in your infrastructure. Or not even moved, we actually rebuild that automatically so that you can actually use it from there. There are several workflows behind that. We will see that in just a second. So when we look at it, just to give you a bit of a short idea, this all sounds nice and easy, just like a few clicks in automation, just to give you a bit raw idea of all the stuff which is going on in the backend. All of these are basically individual steps. So we are importing configuration, creating kickstart servers, deploying vCenter server on the management cluster. If it has vSAN in there, we need to configure all the storage behind the vSAN nodes. If iSCSI or NFS, it's a bit easier for us. Configure the vCenter server, deploy VRO, deploy NSX on the stack, configure NSX for internal routing and everything else for the infrastructure, and get all of that working, and then we move on for vCloud Director. So building the load balancers for vCloud Director, so if we have always at least 2 cells, it could be more depending on the sizing you have, create the Postgres server, configure all of that. If any of you have ever worked with vCloud Director in the newer releases, you also need to build these Cassandra nodes and all that kind of stuff. Even that's going to be taken away from you. We will automatically build all of that for you, configure those as well, deploy the vCloud Director cells, configure those basically. So everything in the end will also be licensed. So the system is going to ask you for the license key. So once everything is done, there is basically nothing for you to do instead of actually running individual workloads on it. Deploy VROps if you choose it. Create PSCs for the resource pods. So we keep resource pods and management pods completely separated from each other. Build the vCenter servers and everything else, and then we deploy the resource pod on top of that. So again, it's quite a lot of work. Those are the workflow informations behind that. Let's quickly look how this actually works in real life. So again, this is the initiator VM. You could host that in a physical ESXi box, VMware Workstation, Fusion. So you can even place a notebook in your in that appropriate VLAN and actually get everything started from there. Once the initiator is up and running, as said, we need to actually do some basic configuration changes. So these VMs come predefined with some predefined IP addresses, and then you import the configuration files, and that's going to actually then customize all of this and reboot the complete initiator so that it's actually more linked to your infrastructure. Overall, there is not much you need to do, so you don't need to be a VRO expert or anything like that, only because all of this is built in Orchestrator. It's basically there, and you just need to, and you have a step-by-step guide. When I later on show you the documents, it's basically a monkey see, monkey do manual, which says with a screenshot, it's like click here, click there, upload the file here. So that should actually be very straightforward and simple, so you import the workflows. And that's the other good part, because we always, the workflow engine the workflow parts and the documents are within the central site. If at any point in time we identify any issues, we can always actually make updates, and you don't need a new initiator VM or anything like that. So it's a relatively straightforward process. And now we fast forward through this quite a bit. So this actually in real life takes a bit longer. This in real life can take, I think the total video is 3 or 4 minutes. That's representing 5 or 6 hours in real life. But if you were to do all of this manually, I'm pretty sure you will not even get half of it done in the same time. So that's the overall process behind it. So again, now the initial configuration has changed. It has now adopted the IP addresses we chose before, and this is now where we are going to actually do the kickstart of the actual infrastructure. And this is where we take bare metal physical hosts and actually PXE boot them into the infrastructure. So you don't even have to pre-install ESXi or anything on the infrastructure. We are going to completely do that for you. So you will see once the system gets there in just a second that we get all of that in an automatic fashion, and then you see us automatically deploy the individual hosts and everything else. So it skipped that part already. Yeah. So this is where the system now kind of tells you there is also going to be a message box later on. And you can now see how it automatically actually boots individual hosts. We just actually manually went into the hosts and selected PXE boot for them. And you can even see it comes up with the boot menus, and it's now actually booting these hosts off that initiator VM and locally installing it. Also during the designer, it asked you whether it should install it locally on the first disk, USB, SD card, or anything else. It will also, if these hosts are going to be used for vSAN, we are automatically going to clean out any disks. So even if there is a pre-installed vSAN from a previous scenario or something like that on there, we are going to actually wipe all of that out. I automatically identify which are the cache disks, which are the capacity disks, and all of that. So you don't have to worry about any of that anymore. And now the system is in throughput mode and actually builds the complete infrastructure stack. And now we have the management stack, and the same procedure now applies to the resource stack. And again, process is pretty similar. You kick off the workflow. There is no data entry we really have to do here. We can also check in the vCenter server already. You see all the individual VMs which were created. All of those are base CentOS images, if they are not appliances from VMware, where we run through the complete install. So those are fresh machines all the time, which also means it's much easier for us to update a lot of the stuff, and you don't have to go through a lot of the manual processes around that. NSX is completely pre-configured. You will see that we have the load balancers and everything up and running in the infrastructure. So none of that is something you have to worry about anymore, because all of this comes in a completely automated fashion then and is completely pre-built for you. So I think that's going to be quite an improvement from a timing perspective and from an operations perspective for you to actually be much easier and quicker in the deployment process, because everything is basically pre-built based on the CRD or our VVD designs, which are behind all of this infrastructure. So while we keep this running real quick, let me quickly jump over and show you some of the documents so that we have a bit of an idea on how that works. There we go. So this, just as an example, is a completely customized, and I can zoom in here so that you can most likely read something from the back a bit more. So this is the completely, one of the architecture diagrams which you can get out of it. You can see it completely customized, the host names, IP addresses in there. It has all the networks in here. We have down here information about all the VMs in the infrastructure, again, including all the IPs. That's one of the diagrams. Just to give you an idea on how some of the operations and deployment guides look like. It's pretty straightforward, step by step. And again, the beauty here is because we know all the IP addresses and everything else from your infrastructure, we can completely customize all of that directly so that it's basically bulletproof for people to implement. We can also look into some of the architecture documents. You see all the design decisions, which requirements and everything else they link behind to. All of that is completely built and customized for you and has their own IP addresses in there. Also very interesting for a lot of people is we bring you these configuration sheets which contain all the information about all the port groups, everything we build in the infrastructure, every vSphere port group, every ESXi host, configuration of each network adapter, everything is completely documented in Excel spreadsheets and everything else. So that really should make your life a lot easier in the infrastructure to work with in the end. So I think that should actually... let me quickly go back here. Yeah. So from a video perspective, this continued in the backend, deployed the hosts and everything else. So the final stage at the moment is you would have a vCloud directory, including provider VDCs completely set up for you. You would have your vRops, including tenant app and everything else deployed for you, log insight, network insight, all these tools completely configured, customized for your environment. Usage meter is pre-configured. If you tell the system you have an existing usage meter, it would not deploy that. So all of that is done for you and going to help you run and operate your infrastructure. Good. And I'm handing back to you for kind of the summary then.
All right. Thank you, Yves. So how many people here think that this will help them in their infrastructure? All right,
Do you
awesome.
like it?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. Everyone's too quiet. You like it? Yes?
A bit more enthusiastic.
Yeah. You like it? Yeah. Woo! Woo! Come on. There we go. This is being recorded, so we need to hear you guys. You're skeptical. So you want to? So I'll have time for Q&A, and you could ask questions. I'll hear the skepticism. Hope we can answer. So at the end of the day, I mentioned Cloud Provider Pod is basically a automated deployment mechanism for a fully interop tested infrastructure, but it's more than just automation, as Yves showed. It's also automatic documentation that's customized based on your design inputs. And it's hardware agnostic based on HCL compatibility, so it gives you flexibility and choice from the infrastructure perspective. And this is purpose-built for cloud providers to provide a VCD-based multi-tenant cloud. So I mentioned this allows providers to be able to focus more on building out services on top of VCD-based infrastructure and tenant-facing services for enterprises instead of focusing on the nitty-gritty of documenting the design and building out the infrastructure and looking up the interoperability of all the different products and worrying about whether these products actually work together. So I think now for the next, say, 10, 12 minutes or so, I'll open it up for any questions and Q&A. If you have a question, please just come up to the mic here. This is being recorded, so do I have any questions? And you can start off here.
Okay, first off, does it support authorizing certificates through the VMCA? So can I reinsert my environment through this process automatically, or do I still have to go do that manually?
There, at least according to current plans, version 1.0 will have a workflow which will allow you to redeploy all the certificates for public and internal systems.
Fantastic.
So that's not only the vSphere parts, but everything else, because the public side. The reason why we don't do that, just as a bit of a background, the reason why it doesn't make sense to do that in the designer and in the initial deployment, so it's a day 2 operation workflow, is because we would need to ask you to upload those into the designer, and I cannot, with my background and in doing a lot of professional services work with service providers, I cannot imagine that a lot of service providers are willing to give us their public and private key for some publicly facing certificates. If that would work that way, we are more than happy to actually add that, but that's...
You're hitting on the source of my question.
Yeah.
What about customizing uplinks on my DV switch ports? Can I get that granular in the deployer, or is that something I have to do in post-config?
So you have the option at the moment to choose between 2 or 4 uplinks, and you can pick, so the predefinition for us is if you pick 2 uplinks, we use everything for them. If you have 4, you can differentiate between data and storage services. So, and then you can pick which adapter is going to be used for which specific service.
And that's additional in addition to management?
So 2 adapters will always go for management and data traffic, and 2 adapters will go for storage and whatever traffic.
Okay. And my last question is, how do you handle like patching and maintenance, vulnerabilities, things like that? The underlying OSs, you said yourself, you're deploying them new, so how are we handling like mitigation and keeping up to date?
So yeah, so this is initial 1.0 is just day 0 automation. So it would be based on your existing OS level tools for patch and automation. We are looking at additional lifecycle management capabilities going forward, but that would be for the infrastructure stack in general. Also, the OS stack would be existing OS tools.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. All right.
Can you customize the type of deployment? Or is it a standard config, or is it like HA for VROPS and the vCenter config and the things like that when it's deployed?
So at the moment, most of it is predefined. However, as you have seen, all of this is orchestrator workflows. All of them are open. So you could either actually try to do it yourself or engage VMware or us to actually help you customize that for your needs. And then you can completely have that customized.
Yeah.
That's the whole point with it. It's not a completely baked solution in the end. It can be customized if necessary.
Yeah, it's not a closed box. It's extensible from automation, data automation perspective. And if you have in-house VRO skill set to extend on this, that's potential large amount of extension could happen from automation perspective also. Or as mentioned, we're going to continue to add additional capabilities that's tied into the overarching designer and deployer and automated documentation capabilities.
Will it support cross vCenter NSX?
Not in 1.0 release. That's something that we're looking at for the next release when we add VCD 9.5 into the architecture.
Is vSAN required, or does it support third-party storage? I mean, I see it there. Like what's out of the box right now?
So vSAN is not required. We also support NFS and iSCSI. And the second part of the question was, what is out of the
Third-party storage support. Like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, third-party storage support, that is me. So basically, it's a generic support for any HCL listed third-party storage that is NFS or iSCSI based.
So maybe a question at that point. How many of you would still require Fibre Channel? Okay.
Yeah. It does not automatically deploy Fibre Channel. Fibre Channel infrastructure would have to be a separate manual process.
Yeah, or it would then require customization.
Yeah, once again, we could customize it specific to your array in the environment, but that would be an additional PS or workflow creation.
Yeah, and the challenge when you think about Fibre Channel and some of these other methodologies for vSAN, it's easy because we know it's our host. We can basically rip out any disk. The challenge is, imagine just the big mistake. For whatever reason, the Fibre Channel admin actually gives us a LAN which is already in use on any of the other clusters. The ways we are cleaning up stuff, you will not be able to fast enough look at it how quickly we can erase hundreds or thousands of VMs. So all of that needs to be sorted when you think about it, and that's why it is not necessarily that easy. So if you can actually build an environment which is where you can say that is rock solid, then most likely it can be done with relatively small amount of customization to actually make that work on Fibre Channel for you.
All right, go ahead here.
Is this a tool that can be run multiple times as we make changes to the physical underlying hardware in a cluster, or does it need to just be run once and then everything else is manual after that? Let's say we're adding a host or maybe changing some things.
So at the moment, it's an initial deployment, but you could actually use the same workflows to deploy other hosts. So the Kickstart host would be there. So what would happen if you were to take an additional host now and actually attach it and boot it up? It would not automatically configure itself. It would actually present you with a boot menu if you haven't actually removed that part out of the system, and you could actually manually force it to install. Then you would need to actually enter the IP addresses, but you could still use the workflows. Clearly, for one of the next releases, we are looking for the ability to make all of that easier. But again, the question is always, it's 1.0, and it's always the question is, how much do you try to solve in the first release, and how much more important is it to actually make it available to people? And then we can actually, with short iterations, and I'm not sure what's the timeline, do you have an idea of how quickly we are going to rev new versions? Is it half year or?
Yeah, at least so right now, so part of this effort, we're aligning this to the bill of materials with VMware Validated Designs, which is updated at least every 6 months. So you can expect at least every 6 months a new release. And I mentioned our next release, we'll look at adding some of the products that we're announcing this week, such as VCD 9.5, and also from a BOM perspective, we'll update it. We'll also add many additional capabilities. You have a question here?
Yeah. In the demo, it mainly shows a fresh deployment. But how about, is that capable to do the existing deployment expansion?
So yeah, so 1.0 does not address brownfield environments. You can utilize it if you have an existing usage meter or metered environment, you can deploy a new basically pod or a new VCD environment, but brownfield is not addressed in 1.0. So existing environments, upgrading existing environments is not addressed in 1.0.
No, I mean after deploy. After deployed by the pod, and then I want to expand it.
Oh, okay.
Is that capable?
So I think that's the question that we just answered, where it is possible.
Yeah, it's possible at the moment for at least from a release plan. I think it would not be there in day one. But as said, the workflow packages can always be updated even within releases. So there is a chance to actually provide that feature maybe at a later point in time if there is enough demand or something else. So this will be a lot of demand-driven development for this product.
Yeah, because I think that on the web, you show it on the deployment need to generate from the website, but it seems no record or something can be recorded. So I think it's. You have answered in this version is no capable for the expansion, right?
No, I think the import, when you say record recorded, so there is a configuration that if you want to make updates to the actual design, you can re-import that into the designer and make changes that will automatically reconfigure the VRO package for automation also. So it's a matter of whatever capabilities we support from a design perspective or changes that can be made, you can re-import a previously created configuration and update that configuration to update the deployment parameters.
Thank you.
Are you guys going to be adding support for vCloud availability?
So yeah, so we are, it isn't in 1.0. We are going to add it in the next release. That is one of the targets for the next release.
Awesome.
In the components that are being deployed, as they get deployed, is it just coming up with like vanilla settings that are standard for deploying each component, or are you doing kind of a best practice configuration for interoperability of all these components together?
So in the design documents, you can see that there is a bunch of design decisions we took, and that's, for example, even something like hardening some of the ESXi hosts with putting them in lockdown mode, and all of that is going to be done throughout the process. So that is also one of the requirements, because this should actually link to the VVD designs, and based on that, we need to apply a lot of settings, and all of what we know there is actually going to be applied already.
Yeah, and internally we actually gone through a process of looking at almost 400 design decisions, how they're applied to VVD, how they can be applied in a VCD infrastructure. Some of those designs, if you're familiar with VVDs today, obviously it doesn't address VCD. That's the reason why we're building this. But some of those decisions may not be one-to-one because they're not applicable from a product or interop perspective. So the ones that are applicable, obviously they're environmental or product VCD based and maybe not applicable providers, but we're aligning as many decisions as possible to that VVD best practices that have been tested over time based on SDDC stack.
Does it support customization of things like internal versus external PSC and kind of maybe more organizational kind of design decisions that don't reflect against the architecture?
So for now, it has a pre-described rule for all of that. Again, as all of this is workflows, etc., we could customize it to specific needs, but most likely the general release will actually have a predefined design for these pieces. The configuration files and a lot of things in the backend could actually do what you are asking for, but the question is always also how complex do we want to build the designer in the front end? Because if I'm going to give you all these 300, 400, whatever design decisions in the front end, it will take you ages to configure that on the designer. So if there is organization-specific needs, that's exactly why this was built to be customizable.
Yeah.
If I have a pre-built like Kickstart or deployment script that I use already to automate my vCenter and PSC deployments, is that something that I could like insert into the workflow somewhere, or is that maybe too early in the process for what the automation's doing?
We do something similar for custom ISO images. So for example, if you have specific servers or network adapters on how we get the drivers and everything in. So we do that already on that side. That's where we have a standardized process for it. There is no standardized process to apply what you were just asking for. But again, this is also going to be kind of driven by demand. So if there is demand for that, there should not be a real big reason why this could be done. And then it always needs to be defined whether this is a general change, so it becomes part of the generic release, or it's going to be a customized solution. And then you could maintain it yourself or centrally.
Last thing I'm going to say is, as far as the documentation and things go, we're a PCI ready, a multi-tenant cloud environment, multi-site, HIPAA ready. So we have a lot of compliance and documentation needs. You mentioned earlier about the hardening and things. A way to be able to deploy like a predefined hardened version that would meet my regulatory compliance needs and provide me that documentation. Like, you just saved me and my team like a month's worth of work every year just with the documentation there. So having a version that's maybe more hardened, that looks at some of those service provider needs.
That's absolutely something
huge.
we're targeting and looking at wherever option and flavor to configure for compliance needs. That's absolutely on.
That's fantastic. This looks amazing. Thanks, guys.
All right. So I think we're out of time here, but thank you everyone, and definitely appreciate all the questions and sticking around, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. And feel free to reach out to me on Eves or any other questions, and make sure you check things out. If you want to learn more, you can go to cloudsolutions.vmware.com to check out more about Cloud Provider Pod. It'll be available soon. We'll check out our booth. You can go see other demos on our booth for Cloud Provider Pod and other of our cloud provider innovations. Down on the Solution Exchange floor, we have demos in Cloud City. And obviously, if you want to look at some of the products that Cloud Provider Pod deploys from a VC perspective, you can look at our hands-on lab and get some hands-on with the actual products. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the show.